dangerously close. This episode was brought to you by William Mitchell Audio. And I've got great news for everyone. William Mitchell Audio is giving me a second chance to compose a brand new jingle for their company. This is really going to knock your socks off. And if you happen to be an airline pilot listening to this podcast right now, go ahead and click on the autopilot because you're going to want a headbang. Okay, if you'd like to hear it, here it goes. Whatever happened to predictability? The milkman, the paperboy, the evening TV. Everywhere you look, everywhere you go, there's a heart, a hand to hold on to. Everywhere you look, everywhere you go, there's a face with WilliamMitchellAudio.com. Go to WilliamMitchellAudio.com. My guest today is Leah Womboy. Leah is the founder of Hekima for the Future, which emphasizes the importance of regenerative agriculture and provides educational events, as well as garden design and implementation. Hekima means wisdom in Swahili, and for the future is a nod to all that we can build together instead of our camaraderie stemming from suffering we have endured. Leah believes that to move forward, we must examine our past and present relationships of exploitation. We must recognize and acknowledge that enforcing the earth to produce crops in an unnatural way, especially relating to mono-agriculture, we have exploited people for labor in the form of slavery and today's widespread exploitation of migrant workers. It is crucial to understand that exploiting the earth and people go hand in hand, and we can make the choice to stop. We can use our ancestors as a guide and produce food in a way that is harmonious with the earth and what we claim as our values. Because of Leah's belief in a better future, she has dedicated herself to educating others about sustainable agricultural practices and establishing these systems across the globe. What's up, Leah?
Hi, thank you for having me.
You're the most patient person I've ever met. I'm just to let the listeners know, I'm going to edit out the first 3 times I tried to read that bio, and that's going to make it seem even more ridiculous when you realize how poorly I did on the 3rd try. But
That's fine.
But like I was saying before we started, I'm so very excited to have you on the podcast, and thanks so much for being here.
Yeah, of course. I'm excited to be here.
I guess like before we get into a ton of specific stuff, can you give me just like a little overview of what Hekima for the Future is, like in the sense of what is Hekima for the Future's mission and philosophy?
Yeah, definitely. So it's kind of evolved. I mean, all things do, all adventures, go in different directions than we plan them to. When it started, I was just really kind of obsessed with food forests, which for anyone who doesn't know, a food forest is basically a garden, but it's based on a forest ecosystem. So it looks at the forest as a model, and then the way that you plant the plants, the way you make the selection, the way that everything works together, it ends up kind of working together like a forest. And then the idea is that over time, you have a system that's producing a lot, but doesn't really require as much maintenance. Now, of course, getting them started does take a lot of work, but they're really, really great systems long term. So that has kind of evolved as I've become more involved with different things in the community. So it obviously food forest still being part of the systems that I would like to implement for people, but kind of taking more of an educational route, more of an event route, and kind of bringing community together. I have kind of pivoted from just talking about food forests to tying that into conversations about food sovereignty. So food sovereignty is important. It's a little bit different from food security because food security really plays into the system that we are a part of now, and just making sure that people have food, but doesn't really account for the fact that a lot of that food isn't very healthy, or it's not easily accessible. We've got a lot of food deserts and stuff like that. So food sovereignty is really people having the control and ability to produce that food, and then reaping the benefits of that labor, which usually, those don't exactly correspond with each other. So it's kind of evolved into that, like a big emphasis on regenerative agriculture, which I guess my kind of synopsis of that is like making the ground better than you found it. So if you're planting a garden, making sure that you're doing it in a way that feeds that soil, that fosters biodiversity, that in the end is a really healthy system.
That was a fantastic overview.
Yes, sorry, it was a little wordy, but
No,
yeah.
no, no, not at all. And it was amazing because so many questions that I am going to ask you later, like it's cool because you touched on them for a moment, and then we'll get back to a lot of that. So that's cool. Here's like a thing like speaking about like I'll just dive into whatever I wrote.
Yeah.
Because I would say like even before we like what we would consider modern history, there have been examples of unsustainable treatment of the environment that have wiped out entire communities of people. But now we're doing that on a planetary scale. And can you explain what mono agriculture is and what are some of the major ways it affects us globally?
Yeah, of course. So I guess caveat is that I'm obviously not an expert on all things. So there's definitely going to be some viewers who might have more depth of information in certain places. But basically, mono agriculture, mono being like one or singular, is basically when you put all of this effort and resources into farming and harvesting one major cash crop. So quite often that's corn. I live in Nebraska, so across the Northwest, we see a lot of corn, soy. But then if you look back in other places, maybe that's cotton, maybe that's rice, maybe it's something else. So, and it's obviously not bad to grow these things, but at least one thing that I have seen in the reading that I've done and the research that I've done is that oftentimes, in order to dedicate so much land and so much resources to growing one thing, that requires a lot of force. And it can require force with the land. If you think of the inputs that you need to make the soil be able to sustain that singular crop instead of, rotating the crop yearly. And it also requires that force as a labor input. So, obviously, if you're going to be doing something at such a high scale, it can require a lot of work. So, that could be, workers harvesting that either in the form of slavery, as what happened before, or in the form of, like you had touched on in the intro, taking advantage of and exploiting migrant workers. And then there's a whole bunch of other issues that really go into that. If you look at farmers and mental health, or farmers and quality of life, how much are they getting paid for these crops? It's really complex. It's never as simple as we're just growing corn. It's You have to kind of look at the full picture of everything that goes into that.
And just when you're talking about corn, the first thing that comes to mind, and you were talking about food deserts earlier too. And just for anyone that doesn't know what a food desert is, like, just off the top of your head, it just means you live in an area where there's not ready access to nutritious food. It might even mean that even a traditional grocery store is kind of out of your reach. You might be, you know, the best thing available to you might be a Burger King or gas stations, and a lot of that is that's where corn comes in so many ways, because no matter where any gas station, if you ever go on a road trip, every gas station in the country is going to have a million things made out of corn, which is all of your Mountain Dew and soda and every
Yeah.
single like thing. And then yeah, I mean, like, there's calories in that. You can technically live off it for a while, but yeah, man, maybe corn's not the best way to go for us as a as dedicating
Well,
like entire states to crops of it.
yeah. So, well, corn ends up in a lot of places. So, of course, it ends up in a lot of the foods that we eat as corn syrup. But it also ends up in other things as byproducts, and a lot of it goes to grazing animals as well. So, a lot of the corn goes to feed for the animals that we eat later, or it goes and it becomes a product that gets turned into fuel. Like ethanol, that type of thing. So, a lot of the corn that you actually see grown doesn't end up making it into food. So a lot of our farmland that we're using is used for crops that don't end up in actual food production.
It's my understanding too that there is actually almost no use for the amount of corn that we produce in the first, like, even once you've done ethanol feed, corn syrup, everything, you end up with uh maybe thousands of silos, maybe like hundreds of thousands of pounds of corn that can't be used.
Yeah, yeah. I'm not as familiar to understand like the full extent of our waste. However, understanding our waste in other areas, I would not be surprised if that was actually the case.
Oh, hey, let's like step back away from this for 1 second because you said you're in Nebraska.
Mhm.
Uh, I've never been there, but I've been informed that my grandfather is from there.
Yeah,
I don't really know that guy. I met him like twice, so it's not it's not like I learned a lot about Nebraska. But you were born in Kenya?
I was. Yeah. Yeah, I was born in Kenya. I only lived there for about a year, and then I actually grew up in Pennsylvania, which is where my mom's family was living at the time.
Oh, cool. And why would you go from Pennsylvania to Nebraska?
So we moved for my husband's job.
Oh, okay. Well, that makes sense.
Yeah.
I was I was curious if you were just like, well, this just is a great place to do this project, or like to maybe do experimenting with like food forests or whatever. I mean, I
Yeah,
assume that Nebraska is good for agriculture. Obviously, that must be their main export. I could be wrong.
I'm not sure if it is, but as far as being like the main product that they produce and get their financial revenue from, I definitely have enjoyed living here, and I've connected with a lot of people both in or urban and rural agriculture. That being said, I might not have like a great comparison because it wasn't exactly something that I was interested in Pennsylvania. So I don't really
Yeah.
know how much, communities differ, but people out here have been really receptive, to me and my projects and my ideas. And that's been really nice. I wasn't quite expecting that, just being relatively new to the area. I'm from the East Coast, so sometimes it's very much, if you're not from here, it can be hard to kind of tap into some of those projects. But I've found that Nebraska is really great for connecting with people on this because people are just really open and receptive to it. And I think really ready to learn more about food production and how they can get involved with it too.
Yeah. One last question, just about you too, though. Like, have you ever gone back and visited Kenya? Have you seen it as an adult or?
I haven't. This the situation was a little bit complicated, and I would really love to go back someday. I'm really hoping that I can. There's a lot of family that I would really like to connect with, but I have not had the opportunity to go back yet. But maybe in the next year or two, I'd like to make it out there.
It's one of my dream destinations, and honestly, like it's even on this podcast. Like, so I've had a couple people, one person in particular who I'm struggling for the words, but the sanctuaries, the animal sanctuaries. She
Mhm.
worked there doing that, and then like doing like kind of safari work. That's how they like get their funding. And then I had
Yeah.
another guest who her main thing is she does tracking, and so she had
Oh, wow.
worked in a lot of the anti-poaching efforts. Fortunately, Kenya is one of the countries where there is it's actually really well maintained, and like poachers do not do well in Kenya. I
Oh,
mean, like
really?
it happens, but
Yeah.
like there's places where like they're far more, it's easier for them to travel and get around. But Kenya is like, it's so popular, it's a popular destination. People are there to see these beautiful safaris and like the Masai Mara and all that. So it does protect the animals. So that's very cool. Anyway,
Yeah.
enough
That's
about
cool.
Kenya.
Well, I hope you get to go, and I hope I get to go too.
um, can you explain to me we were talking about like so mono agriculture, like that's kind of like what we got, this industrial kind of bullshit thing we got going. What is regenerative agriculture, and what are some of the regenerative systems that the Hekima for the Future implements and educates people about?
Yeah, of course. So I had a really great friend who, the first time that we really met and we're talking about regenerative agriculture, she defined it as agriculture or systems that give life. So if something is regenerative, it gives life. And it kind of goes back to the idea of leaving that soil better than you found it. Um, you know, soil is very complex. We look at it as just dirt, as just this kind of, quiet, just mass of dirt. But there's this whole world beneath the surface, just like we have a world above the surface. There's microorganisms, there's, worms, there's nematodes, there's root systems, there's a mycelial network. It's very, very complex. And unfortunately, a lot of times the way that we interact with it damages it. And then over time, the things that live inside of the soil, the things that are nutritious to the plants that we have to grow, the things that support that plant life over time, we basically end up killing them as we strip off the topsoil, as we put inputs into the soil that aren't great for the system as a whole. So regenerative agriculture basically really focuses on building and giving to that soil, so that way long term it can continue to be really healthy and produce. Of course, the immediate benefit of that to us is that we have this healthy soil that we can grow really wonderful food in. Long-term benefit is that's just good for the planet as a whole. And if your soil is healthy, then hopefully that effect can kind of reverberate out and be good for, neighboring soil, neighboring areas. So there's different ways to achieve this. I think a lot of people think of just putting in like fertilizer and that being good to beef up and build and amend the soil. But you kind of have to have like a full systems thought of, well, where does that fertilizer come from? What's the byproduct? Because a lot of fertilizer does have, really toxic byproducts. So how can we put healthy inputs into the soil that aren't actually detrimental someplace else where we can't see it, so we're not thinking about it? So there's different ways. A lot of that is, how do you plant? Food forests are one great way, because you basically would plant these plants. You're focusing on perennial plants instead of annuals. For anyone who doesn't know, an annual is something that you plant once, or well, you plant it once, it lives through a season, and then it dies, and you have to plant it again the next year, basically. So like a tomato plant is an annual, because every year you're planting a new tomato plant. A perennial plant is something that can live for, more than 1 year. So for example, strawberries tend to live about 7 years. If you plant asparagus, it can live sometimes, 20, 25 years, depending
Wow,
on the
really?
zone. Yeah.
I had
So
no idea about that.
yeah, so those plants just continue producing. Obviously you keep them healthy and they do well. Bushes, obviously, like berry bushes are an example, fruit trees are an example. So you really focus on these plants that you plant once, and then they have these they continue to come back. So you don't have to dig up the soil, you don't have to disturb it. Um, Different plants function in different ways. There's plants that are nitrogen fixers, where they have like this deep tap root and these little nodules on their roots, and they pull up nitrogen from deep into the dirt and like pull it up, so that way other plants can access that nutrient. There's I guess I'm trying to think of like a succinct way to describe it, but basically my big things are trying to do no-till as much as possible, so not continually digging things up. If you're using beds where that's just what you're going to have to do, making sure that you do a good crop rotation. I think for things like nightshades, which are like tomatoes, potatoes, etc., if you plant them in a bed, you want to give them a few years in between before you plant them again, because they're really pest prone. They're prone to certain diseases that you don't want to just have in the soil constantly. So doing your rotations, making sure that you use some type of compost or something to give nutrient to that soil that's not going to be detrimental in another way. I like to tell people to use leaves. We're kind of obsessed as a culture with raking up leaves, but leaves decompose and it puts a lot of nutrients back into the soil. So if you just leave them alone, they do their job. But of course, if you're raking them up, they
Yeah.
can't do their job.
Or worse than that. And this I don't want to just sound like I'm an old man going like, you know what I don't like, but these guys out here with these leaf blowers, and like, there's leaves on my lawn, so I'm gonna go out here, I'm gonna burn a ton of gasoline to blow the leaves into the street. Like, what are
Yeah,
you
yeah.
accomplishing?
It's so hard, because like if you have, a housing association, or you have at least the cultural pressure, the social pressure of making sure that you have a manicured space, it is really hard
Yeah, for sure.
to take part in some of these practices, because people just don't think they're pretty and they don't like that, and they might not see
Or
the value in
they
it.
say things, yeah, they're like, you're lowering my personal property value
Yeah.
because your lawn is like an ecosystem. So
Yeah. And it should
uh,
be an ecosystem.
can I jump back like a minute to something you were talking about earlier, and you said nightshade plants, and I'm not familiar with that term, but when you were saying that potatoes were one of those, is that something like the potato famine in Ireland? Was that like a form of unsustainable farming? Is that like kind of what happened there, or are you?
Um,
I'm not trying to like
I'm
throw like crazy curveball questions at you. It just popped in
No,
my
it's
head.
okay. I'm not sure. So I mean, potentially I'd have to definitely do some research because I have no idea.
Something. All right. But for certain, and like, I think something like, so that's like, this is closer to home here in America, and something we know for certain was the Dust Bowl, and
Mhm.
like which inspired like the book, like the Grapes of Wrath and all that shit. That
Yeah.
was definitely, that was unsustainable farming, combined with other unforeseeable, forces of
Yeah.
nature. But we're gonna see things like that. Like, people are concerned that might be happening in places like Oregon or
Yeah.
Washington, or like these very like lush forested places because of the wildfires. Is there anything like kind of involved in that, like with that you guys are working on, or like just, or not working on but thinking about?
Yeah. So the way that I would correlate that, I mean, obviously that's very high scale, but we are farming also at high scale across the country. And we're doing it, like I said, in this way that isn't exactly great for the earth. I mean, I was reading recently that said something that Nebraska's lost something like 30% of its topsoil,
Holy
which
that's a lot.
yeah, I mean, it really is. And I think that some people they hear that and 30% as as it correlates to 100 might not sound like that much
Think about it
or
this way: if you lost 30% of your body, you would take that very
yeah,
seriously.
right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean that's where so many of the plants that we eat, their root structures exist in the topsoil, and that's where a lot of the nutrients are. I mean, obviously there's nutrients all throughout the different layers of the soil, but um, like it's so important and it's so crucial because it's going to continue to erode and it's going to continue to break down. And I guess for those who are concerned with global warming, I know that a lot of people are not, but for those who are, there's different if you look at a city and I've seen different graphs where it looks at redlining, which was obviously racially based, but redlining wasn't just a matter of where people could live, it was how those spaces were maintained and planned. So if you looked at white neighborhoods, they had more vegetation planted, they had trees and they had shrubs and they had things like that in their neighborhoods. And then if you looked at black neighborhoods or Hispanic neighborhoods, they didn't have those things. Like the city didn't concern themselves with planting trees in that area. So you can literally walk through different parts of your town. And if you happen to be able to take the temperature in certain spaces, there's like the little like gun thing where you can shoot it out of space and it'll tell you what the top temperature is. And you can see how the neighborhoods that have had trees planted, that have shrubs, that have grass, that have these different plants, they are significantly cooler in temperature than these other areas and these other spaces. And the ground is kind of like that too. It will be significantly hotter if you are not cover cropping. So basically, when you harvest your soy or you harvest your corn, a lot of farmers will put down a cover crop, and that can be, various like ground cover that will grow in your off season and then basically cover the space. And it does help keep the temperature down in the soil. So things like that are really important. Um, it's kind of, I guess, on a basic level, if you're gardening outside and you are watering something and you can see in your own yard if it's near a tree where it has shade, obviously that water stays on that soil longer, it's not evaporating. But if it's just in bare soil, in the dirt and there's direct sun exposure to that, it'll dry up and evaporate very quickly. So you want to have some type of cover, you want to have mulch, you want to have leaves, you want to have something that can basically retain the moisture, but also keep the temperature down. And, maybe like in your yard, that might not seem like such a big deal because it's just kind of small scale. But if you're looking at how this correlates to like large scale farmers, that's how we ended up, with certain catastrophes, like you had mentioned, like it's something that's really, really important.
And this is, I think this is really where I wanted to get to, and it's the idea that agriculture, we've got monopolies, we've got Monsanto and so forth, and they control the food sources essentially right now. But there has to be a critical mass. There has to be a point where, like, if more and more people started creating a supply chain of their own, and community gardens were much bigger, or like what you're talking about, food forests, like large areas providing so much more, eventually the bottom line of that company is going to get hit,
Yeah,
and they're going to have
definitely.
to, I mean, one way or another, a change will have to be made. I
Mhm.
don't know if you agree with that.
Yeah, no, definitely. So I think to get to that point, there's a few factors that have to happen. So, you talked about people being able to do this on their own, being able to have community gardens, particularly in my opinion, something like a food forest or a regenerative system. I think I see a lot of the times that community gardens are great and they start out really well, but sometimes as interest wanes or, management changes, things like that, sometimes they'll fail, so you'll see a community garden that was doing really well one year, but then like the next year, um, things happen in people's lives, and they can't keep up with it the same way. Um, and a lot of systems, a lot of things that we do, they'll have that single point of failure where if somebody kind of like can't maintain their commitment to that, then it just won't do as well. And the way that we traditionally grow plants, if they're not being watered, for a couple weeks, they're all dead.
Yeah.
So that's why I like the food forest thing, is because even though it definitely takes a big push and a lot of work to get them off the ground, they're generally resilient systems. So yes, something might die, but something else might do better. And you can observe that space and you can learn from it, and then implement it other places, and then have these basically like these sanctuaries for people to be able to come and get this food. The other thing is people working together. So cooperatives are great. There's a co-op that is getting started here in Omaha called Omaha Sunflower Co-op, and they are really big on people growing their food and then basically selling it together with the co-op. So the growers or the people who are members of this co-op get different benefits. And then also they can provide that produce to the community at different price points. So depending on what people can actually afford to purchase, because obviously if you go to like Whole Foods or any grocery store, really a lot of this food is just priced out of people's ability to actually purchase it.
Yeah.
So we
Thanks,
have
Jeff
to,
Bezos.
right, right.
Fucker.
Yeah. So we have to make it available to people at the price that they can afford. Now, of course, it's much different for me to make food available at a price that someone can afford, because me as a singular person, it takes so much more work, it takes so much more resources for me individually to go grow that food than for a big company to do it. But that's why cooperatives are good, because people can kind of come together, they can share the work, they can also share the benefit. But I think like the last thing too, and I've seen that more people are really interested in agriculture. I think that people are kind of changing their perceptions of it. We definitely have our traditional idea of a farmer, and then we definitely have our traditional idea of hobby gardeners, just kind of being, older people who just kind of hang out in their gardens, grow their tomatoes, love their flowers, stuff like that. And that's great and wonderful. But growing food is activism. And I think that people are really shifting to understanding that mindset. It's not just like this hobby that rich people do, or this thing that it's fun, but it's not really for me. Like to me, it's the foundation of all activism, because if you want to march in the street, if you want to be able to have the capacity to be creative, if you want to write, make art, do all of these things, you can't do that if you haven't eaten. If
Yeah.
you live in a food
Yeah.
desert, like, I say this all the time, like your kid can't go sit in bands and enjoy playing their instrument if their basic needs are met.
Yeah.
So being able to feed people, produce this food for our community, it kind of liberates us in so many other ways. It allows people to do better in school, be critical thinkers, be artistic, do all of these things, get really involved in this other stuff, because they're not hungry. Like you can't do anything if you're hungry. And so, producing food, feeding people, that is like foundational activism. And I
It's one,
think,
it's one of the most insidious aspects of an oppressive society is, yeah, like you're saying, keeping people hungry or malnourished. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
no, no,
I
you're
was just
good.
jumping in there.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a lot, and it all relates to food. If you look at parenting, I've got two kids, and I definitely do my best to parent them, and I think that I'm a good parent, but I also am in a financial position where, like, if my kid drops their food on the ground, I'm not super stressed out because I can afford to give them another lunch.
Yeah.
But if you are from a home where people just don't have those resources, think of how stressful it is for that parent who, like, that's all their kid had that day,
Yeah.
and that food is lost. And so That's going to create moments where people are agitated. Like gentle parenting is like this big thing, which I love, but like it's really hard to be a gentle parent when you're stressed out because you're fighting to provide for your family every day. So, like, families can heal and people can heal by just having their needs met. And it's so frustrating because we obviously live in a country with so much surplus and it's just not available to so many people.
So we've been talking on this for a minute, but these are some concepts, and just like I was wondering if you maybe could just kind of like give like a brief explanation of a couple of these concepts. And the
Mhm.
first one would be, can you explain to me the concept of seeds equal currency?
Yes, of course. So,
Thank you.
so I actually recently had an event in mid-November called Seeds Our Currency. So currency, obviously, the way that we think of it, we think of a monetary value. So yes, seeds have a calculable monetary value that you can purchase them for. However, seeds are so many other things. And one of those things that I think is really important is that, particularly for people who live in this country and unfortunately don't have a link back to their ancestry, obviously because that was taken from them. Seeds are kind of like a bridge to that history. Seeds are culture. They are the way that that food or that plant is eaten, the way that it's prepared, the way that it's used for, the way that it's harvested. So seeds are definitely a link to history, to ancestry, to culture, but also, I mean, seeds, if you look to the future and you look to the things that are really important, you can stockpile as much money as you want to stockpile. But, if banks fail, if cryptocurrency goes away and just becomes, nothing, which could happen, seeds, if you want to exist into the future, seeds are obviously one of those things that give you that opportunity. You have to be able to grow food. You have to be able to produce food. It gives you um, genetic diversity, which is incredibly important in making sure that you can maintain a really healthy crop into the future. It gives you the ability to produce for your family, to produce for your community. So seeds are definitely currency in their monetary value, but they're also currency in what they represent to individual groups, to individual people, and then the opportunities that they present into the future, the security that they give you in the future.
Absolutely. And I don't want to sound grim or conspiracy man, but yeah, but the thing is, uh, nuclear bunkers do exist, and for a reason. And of course, there are caches of seeds there, but nobody's stockpiling bitcoins in a nuclear
Yeah.
bunker. It would have no value. Sorry, all you
Yeah.
Bitcoiners out there, but I mean, let's be real. What's
Well,
really important here?
yeah, and the thing is, like, everything has a valuation based on its perceived importance. So, I mean, the cost of a chair, the cost of anything, it's its perceived value, and that is the monetary value that we give it. But seeds are kind of one of those things that, to me at least, and the way that I think of them, kind of exist outside of that, because we can give it a monetary value, but its value goes so far beyond that. And it's like this guaranteed value that even if you're not using it right now, I mean, obviously you got to store them properly and make sure that they're stable, but it has this long-standing value so far into the future.
you know, uh, this is a little off topic. It is about a seed, though. I'm a superstitious man. I'll admit it, and I do little rituals for good luck here or there. And whenever I find a new one, I get involved. I'll add that one on. And one of them I recently wasn't. It was last winter. It was that if you found an acorn on the ground and you keep it in your pocket, that acorn will like help you grow your, I guess, your dreams, your aspirations, whatever. And I've been carrying this acorn around for like a year.
Yeah, I hadn't heard that one.
I'd never heard about it before either until last winter. But anyway, I've been doing pretty okay in my life, so
Yeah,
maybe I can
maybe
attribute
I'll
to that
try that.
acorn. I don't know. Hold up. It's time to check the mailbag. Every week on the show, we check the mailbag to see if anyone has written a message into the show, and then I answer any comments or questions they might have. This week's message comes from Psychedelic 4 Lit. Psychedelic 4 Lit said, "Hello, bro. What's up? We got some top grade psychedelic stuff available at affordable prices like LSD, DMT, MDMA, peyote, shrooms, chocolate bars, ketamine, codeine, syrup, and a lot more. So I was wondering if you might be interested in any of our stuff, Val. Well, first of all, I want to say, Officer, thank you so much for being a fan of the podcast and for writing in. But I do have to say, I'm getting a little bit older, and the only psychedelic experiences I can really handle, these old bones, are adrenochrome blood rituals. So, that old chestnut. I said chestnut. Anyway, thanks for writing into the show. And now back to the interview. I do want to ask you this too, like it's more like on the concepts thing. And like I said, we clearly have like touched on it some, but once again, as the concept of, could you also explain the concept of production equals independence?
Yes. So when you can produce for yourself, you can be independent. I mean, so much of our lives are kind of this maze of trying to get our needs met, trying to find and procure and secure the things that we and our families need. But if you can make those things for yourself, and your community, then you get to be outside of that. You can live outside of certain systems that are draining in so many different ways. And it's not that work doesn't go into these things. I personally think that it's more satisfying work than other types of jobs.
Yeah.
But the idea that you don't have to be beholden to a system because you don't need it for your survival is, I think, really powerful and really important. And I think that we tend to look at people who are like that as, these kind of weirdos who like live off on their own or live in these like weird communities. But the reality is that to be able to provide for yourself is so rare today, because our learning is so segmented. It's really, I think it's really rare for people to learn things in a way that really pulls everything together, because the way that we go through our education and the way that we go through our careers is we kind of focus on one thing. Um, and we don't really often dabble so much in other things and kind of get semi good at them enough that we could do them. Think if I really wish that I knew like carpentry and electric work and all this stuff, because then I could do so much of that by myself and that would be so valuable. And I'm definitely on my way to learning a lot of those things.
Is the way
But
to go. I've,
yeah,
I've done construction work for a lot of years of my life, but to your point though, like specialization, like being very like, I'm
yeah,
no electrician, and I'm
yeah.
certainly not like a master carpenter, but if you can do some things for yourself, it's just amazing like how much hardship you can get out of your way.
Yeah, and it gives you so much more autonomy over your life and the way you want to spend your time, because when you can provide yourself, you don't have to be beholden to somebody else's schedule. You don't have to like clock in, you don't have to have the commute, you don't have to do these things. Obviously some things you can't produce for yourself raw just because the way that our markets are set up. But it really does give you so much more freedom. And I think the ability to really live a full life. I mean, not that other people aren't, but if that's what you want, like being able to provide for yourself, it's crucial because you can finally exist outside of some of these systems in a way that really gives you enough time to contemplate, how do I want to live? We don't even really get to think of it
Yeah.
because like we go to college and we get these jobs and like we've got debt and we're so bogged down by all of these things. I mean, I think people are like in their 30s and 40s before they can even take a breath and really think of like, what do they want to do and how do they want to live?
If then, I
Yeah,
mean,
if then,
seriously.
right?
I don't know why they made me think of this, but I was just thinking about like it's no secret to anyone. I despise Elon Musk. I think in so many ways he's just like it's just like an example of what's fucking wrong, man. It's like this guy, if you could just, and you could be like, all right, well, let's just take that away from him and use it in any way we want. It's unimaginable what you could do with that kind of money. I mean,
Yeah,
that's like a significant amount of the Pentagon's budget is like his
yeah.
personal wealth. But
I will
anyway,
say, well, all I
go
despise
ahead.
hoarding wealth. I do think that a lot of what he's done forces other legacy companies and legacy industries to finally start changing, and so there is value in that. I'm definitely not like big on hoarding billions, But that being said, I also do like, shaking up some of these crap companies that have had no incentive to change for decades, um, and actually making them change, because that's what we need.
In no way am I refuting what you're saying. I just had like my one thing where it's like it's people will get a Tesla and they'll be like, look what I'm doing, and I'm like, well, and I'm no saint or monk. I have a car, but I also have a bicycle, and I live in a city, but
Yeah.
I I use my bicycle at least 50% of the time for transportation. I mean, I can't. I mean,
Mhm.
also I live in a city, so I can. I guess I'm
Yeah.
sure if you live in Nebraska and you live in a remote location, you can't be like, well, I'm just going to go bike to the next like 100 miles
Yeah.
away or
I don't live
whatever.
in a remote location. Where I live is not very conducive to bike travel, and I also generally have children in the car with me. So
Yeah, yeah, yeah. You're right. I'm being absurd about like saying that you can have a regular
no,
car and a bicycle and you're better than the Tesla owner.
yeah, no, I do get it. I get the concepts though, and it's difficult, but yeah, I don't know. But I mean, definitely not big on stockpiling wealth,
and
because there's so much we can do with it.
and I know we have just really gone off away from we're here to talk about like food independence, but and I'm over here talking about transportation. But if I may, I just want to say one last thing, and I'll totally drop it. And it's just that, like, what we could do better than maybe Teslas is we could do some public transportation, trains, and realistic bike lanes. And
Yeah,
I mean, like, and also like rich people love riding bikes. They like to wear spandex, and just make them do that on their way to like Wall Street.
yeah. No,
Like,
and I agree with you 100%. That being said, though, like it takes so much for cities to actually implement some of those things, to improve public transit should happen, and people are pushing for it to happen. But in the meantime, it's like, what can I do in the meantime? I think, I don't appreciate people who have Teslas and then get really high and mighty about it. But at the same time, if you can signal to, like GM, or signal to these companies that really are just also garbage companies, that we want certain shifts in things. But the other thing is, if we have public transportation, where do you want that fuel source to come from? So do you want to make the shift that eventually they'll come from renewable sources? So I think a lot of that just plays into it. I don't know. It's one of those like voting with your dollars things.
yeah, and that's one of the things I thought that like earlier. I think we were discussing that too. Like, eventually, if you could produce enough food for yourself, then that would, like I said, it would affect the bottom line of so many organizations and companies, corporations. There's I recently read a book. Have you heard of shit, I'm gonna forget his name right now. Great. Whatever, doesn't matter. He's a nutritionist and he wrote a book about like, the psychology of how they do the grocery stores. And you
Yeah,
walk in
yeah.
and it's designed to keep all real food away from you.
Mhm.
All the actual food in the grocery store is like hidden in a way. They like hired tons of like psychologists and all kinds of people to like figure out how to like make it to where you just go around buying like poison and horseshit.
Yeah. Yeah. It's I've read similar things with similar concepts. I haven't read whatever book it is that you're talking about, but it's pretty infuriating, when
Dr.
you think
Greger,
of everything
that's who
that.
it was. Sorry.
Oh, okay. No, yeah, when you think of everything that goes into it, it's really frustrating. I really started kind of getting into a lot of this stuff when I did have my kids, because I was finally doing the research, reading about food, the things that are in food, the things that are in baby products, the things that are, like candles, like you can't, like
Yeah.
there's no escape from it. And like once you get familiar enough to be able to make better choices on one thing, you learn about this other thing, and it really, like, you just kind of spiral. And that's, I really am big into self-sufficiency, because you can cut a lot of that out of your life. Unfortunately, like, you exist. I think you're going to be exposed to a certain level of toxins just from existing in the world, which is honestly crap. And it's frustrating that big companies can make these decisions for you and you can't opt out of like the health detriment. Um, but being self-sufficient, producing your own food, being able to do certain things for yourself, um, I think it's the best bet to at least a little bit being able to pull back from it, while also building your community at the same time. Because that's, I mean, for me, that's what it's about. It's not about like just doing this and then kind of becoming like a hermit. It's about like pulling up community at the same time, teaching people at the same time, really um, giving people the benefit of what I've learned so they don't have to dig as deep for the information.
I think I can bring everything we just said and just tie it all in a little bow right now. First of all, I'm going to apologize to anyone that owns a Tesla. Dude, good job having an electric car. That's great. Secondly, me claiming that riding a bicycle is a solution. I've been hit by a car 3 times. The amount of altercations I've had, like insane altercations, people telling me they're going to kill me and like getting out of the car trying to fight me and shit, just riding my bike.
Wow.
Just, well, I'm following the rules as I know they exist. A lot of motorists don't know how the rules work. If you're on a
Yeah.
bicycle, you have the same. You are a car. That's how it works. That's the law, homie. Anyway, it doesn't fucking matter. The point is, I've gotten these terrible fucking altercations. So it would be absurd for me to say like, hey, don't have a Tesla, ride a bike, be like me. I'm borderline insane. So I'm not a great example. But moving forward, what you're saying is that we're talking about community, and a big part of what would be nice is if there was a more civil society in the first place. If people like
Mhm.
saw me on a bicycle and didn't say, and there's that psychology of people that are in their cars and they don't realize their behavior until they're outside of their car again.
Mhm.
And so they're like, oh, I hate this bicycle guy, I'm going to run him off the road. Maybe if we were all like working together in a food forest, creating our food together, like the way that humans used to be, like we would, because
Yeah,
it's like, that's life. Like food is life, right?
it is. And I mean, there's so many factors that make people behave that way. I mean, there's so many stressors the way that we do things and operate. And I mean, even if we're all growing food forests, like we're still going to be stressed out about a bunch of stuff. It's not going to be like some magic societal fix. However, I think getting to the mentality of community first, of producing for our communities, of doing the best that we can, and also trying to bridge some of those divides, because a lot of the divide that we might feel for our neighbor, it's very manufactured, and it always serves somebody. You always have to ask, if I'm having a negative thought, whether it's about myself, let's think if I'm feeling self-conscious about something on my body or whatever, or if I have a negative thought about somebody else, who does this benefit? If I am feeling
Mm-hmm.
self-conscious and I like go buy makeup or I go buy something, like someone is getting financial gain from the fact that I have this manufactured and perceived detriment. Similarly to if I don't like my neighbor because they look different, they have different religion or a different skin color or different whatever, they speak a different language, there is also somebody who is getting a benefit of that, whether that's a politician or a product that I buy to show that I align with a certain way of thinking. A lot of the frustration and the anger that we feel and the way that we express it is very, very much manufactured. And so when you focus more of your time on community centered things and you have this exposure to other people, I really get frustrated by the fact that people need to be exposed to other people, to actually care about other people. I get really annoyed by that, but unfortunately that's kind of the reality, is that unless you like get to know people and you realize that they're not that different, a lot of people are just kind of going to be jerks. And as a Black female, like I've definitely come to know that, in some of my endeavors throughout my life, and I'm very much used to that. um, but we all more or less want the same things. We want our family to be healthy, we want our kids to thrive, we want love in our lives, we want health, like we want the same things. We're really not that different, and really working on this stuff, and food is kind of like the bridge between so many things. People sharing meals together, breaking bread, like having that ability to come together. I mean, harvesting that food, sharing that food together, sharing the financial, the emotional benefits of all of those things, I think is so great for our communities. There's no one big catch-all band-aid, but I definitely think that this is a big step in the right direction.
No doubt. And like you said, there's no band-aid, but if there's one way to get your head right, in certain ways, especially if you're starting to feel like isolationist or whatever, if you go out, if you get, go travel, and find some people that
Yeah.
don't look like you and don't eat like you. And if you can get an opportunity to sit down and eat with some
Yeah.
people that's like they have a completely different culture. And yeah, the thing is, then it's not going to take you very long to realize we all have for the most part, we're in the same boat.
Yeah.
We're all humans, right?
Yeah. I mean, that and like if you look at most crime, I forget what I was reading. I was reading some article once and I can't like cite it properly. So I don't know, whatever. No one jump on me for this. But I remember reading something that was discussing that most crime stems from basically a lack of resources. Of course, there's really horrible, twisted people out there, and I prefer to like not spend a lot of time thinking about them because it's
Yeah.
just,
But
really
those actually are
disturbing.
anomalies for
But
sure.
um, yeah. So most crime stems from a lack of resources. And so obviously I'm all about food, having people's needs met because I mean that brings down crime levels. It brings down, kids' behavioral issues, quote unquote. And I'm saying that because, I think like kids of certain races and who live in certain areas are more likely to be disciplined for behavioral disturbances than people or other children of the same behavior in other schools and other neighborhoods. And um, really when people aren't stressed, like I said, about their basic needs, there's so much more that they can do. And then there's so much bad stuff that they don't get involved with in the first place because they don't have to. They're not fighting for the money to provide for their families, they're
Yeah.
not the kid who has to get a job to support and supplement his family's income because he needs to make sure that his siblings can eat. Like I mean, if we can just feed our communities, think of what that would do for people.
Yeah, absolutely. And we've talked about food forests like quite a bit, and just like one last like time just to go on it because in my mind and like I'm a very just like visual like imagination kind of
Mhm.
person, so I'm like literally just kind of imagining like a forest of food, and I know you clearly said what it really is,
Mhm.
but I just want to like clarify and like maybe if you could just talk about it one last time too. It's like the idea is that it operates like how we don't have to go and water the forest, like
Yeah, yeah,
like Redwood National Forest doesn't need me to go over there with a hose and make sure that all the trees have
yeah,
water. Does that
exactly.
so like
Yeah.
and I know that you've already talked about this a little bit, but and maybe it's just because I've never known much about this concept, so it's like still like to me visually I'm literally imagining like an acre of just like edible, delicious plants or whatever. And as I mean, how close to reality is what I'm thinking?
Yeah, no,
Or am I
I
just so
mean,
far off?
no, that's it. I mean, people implement food forests in different ways. Like some people don't want to maintain trees, so they make their tallest level bushes, and then they kind of go down from there. So, but and I think that the other thing is that people walk, well, not everybody, but a lot of people walk in forests rather regularly, but you don't always take in all of the variety of plant, all of the different layers that are there in front of you. But in a forest, you would have like an overstory tree, which is like a really huge big tree. And then you'll have some that are kind of smaller. Then you'll have like a shrub layer. You'll have your herbaceous layer, which, like leafy green plants. There's some different ones. Then you have like your cover layer. So if you see, I'm trying to think of like a good example, but a lot of people in their food forest will use strawberries because, strawberry will kind of like spread out, continual sending out roots, and then you get this like nice cover in a forest. Kind of think of it like grass, but not grass because grass and lawns is. And then you've got like roots, and you have climbers.
Are there certain animals that we need for a food forest? Like
Well, I guess it depends on who you ask. And well, you're asking me. Okay, so there
I'm
are
asking you.
there are going to be animals in your food forest. Animals are a part of our ecosystem. People have different opinions about that, and of course, it's not so fun when deer come in and like eat everything.
Yeah.
It's not fun
Totally.
when you have bunnies that are just constantly chewing up and eating the things that you just planted. Um, this I think that it probably depends on the perspective that the person planting the forest takes. There's some like natural barrier things that they can do or that you can do, and they have different varying levels of effectiveness. So if you have like a berry bramble with a bunch of spikes on the bramble, sometimes you can plant something that a deer really likes on the one side of it, and then they hit the spikes and they don't necessarily want to like go into the main forest. Now
Oh,
that
that's
being said,
crazy.
you'd probably have to do that. Yeah, you probably have to do that layer around like the whole thing. They're going to get into parts of it, but you can try to kind of deter them. With rabbits, one thing you can do is like an olfactory barrier, so like a smell barrier, where if they're kind of moving on in a plant that you would really want to not have them eat, you could plant like onions and garlic all around it. And then on the outside of that, give them something that they like. So rabbits really love clover, and it's not really a plant that we use, but it grows quickly. It creates like a really nice ground cover. So some people would plant that instead of grass, and it's much better than planting grass. And bunnies just love to eat it. And so they'll eat that as much as they want, and then they'll get up to the garlic and the onion and like they'll smell it, but they've already got this thing that they really like. So then they're kind of less likely to go towards that thing that you're trying to keep them away from. And of course, it depends how you plant this out. Varying levels of success, just kind of depending on how you're planning your space. There are some ways to handle them. The reality is that they're going to eat things just like they do in any type of garden, just like they do in the forest. They're a part of it. But the idea is kind of that you have this higher yield, and that it doesn't really impact your food. Like there was a project in India, I can't remember the name of the town where it was, but they're having a problem with the elephants coming in and eating their crop. So this was like a big back and forth between the people who lived in the space and the elephants of trying to like chase them out. And it was obviously dangerous because elephants are huge and they can stomp on you without even meaning to. And so there were people who had died from it. And so then I think it was because of COVID, so many people had moved back from that town who lived in different cities, with tech jobs and doing different things. And they actually planted out this whole field that was for the elephants. So they still had their crop, and then the elephants basically had this space where they were encouraged to be. And the elephants never crossed the barrier into the fields where the people were, harvesting their crop and then selling that. So it ended up working out for everybody. So it's kind of there's different ways to handle it, and obviously some of them take more energy, but animals are going to be a part of it. And it would kind of be weird if they weren't. If you
Yeah.
don't see animals and bugs, it's like, what are you doing? Where is the space? It's not really part of the ecosystem.
First of all, that was all amazing stuff. But I have to tell you, Leia, we are getting dangerously close to the lightning round. I have to tell you how this goes. The lightning round is the part of the podcast where I ask you the questions super fast. You don't have time to think, and you seem to be a very cerebral person that thinks a lot. You can't think. This has to come gut reaction, straight from the heart.
Okay. All right.
And sometimes these are super easy, but honestly, I know a couple of these are like at least one or two is kind of hard. So I'm sorry, but
No,
that's
okay.
how it goes.
I'll try.
Part of the podcast.
You can tell that I'm pretty wordy. So
all right, I think you know this one pretty much easy right here. What is the easiest plant to grow in a home garden? Just say like say like you're like me and like you just suck at this, and you're like, all right. And I know this varies from regions, but like we're both in the central time zone, so let's say that.
Maybe peas or like tomato, like something really common that a lot of people at the garden store can help you out with really easily.
Peas are really easy to grow.
I mean, yeah, so peas probably aren't what like most people would do, but like I think that peas just grow really easily. Like you just put them in and you keep them watered and then they grow really fast.
Cool. All right. I know most people like that I know that do this, they always grow tomatoes. So I guess that must be also, like you said, like pretty damn easy, right?
Yeah. I mean,
seeds.
Yeah, you can. I think like some people get really into it with like the pruning and everything and how to properly like produce the biggest yield. But yeah, tomatoes, I mean, it's all, just put it in the ground and let it grow.
All right. Not super in depth, but I am going to ask this like about like, let's just say like right now, I want to do a community garden. How's that going to work? Like, do I have to contact the government and like get their permission and like, or
that is probably more of an in-depth because it depends on your county and your city.
I'm sorry.
It just depends on your city. I mean, if you own the land, if you own the space, you can just make a community garden in your front yard. You can plan it out. You can put a sign that tells your neighbors that you can come by and pick whatever you want, and you could do that tomorrow. If you're going to be like renting city land or something, like there's going to be different rules that go along with that, different applications, things like that.
I just realized how insanely complex that question really is after I said it's a lightning round question that would be the answer. Because I realized even if it is my own land and I don't involve the government, and let's say that there's like an outbreak of E. coli in my garden and I kill a bunch of people, that's like a big deal, right?
Well, Yeah, I mean,
Am I
you're not
responsible?
doing it on a large scale, so I think that that wouldn't be very likely. But if you have like a homeowners association and they're going to complain about the fact that you don't have manicured grass in your front yard because you have all these beautiful garden beds instead, you have to see if there's a chance you could be fined, if somebody could come tear it down. There's definitely a lot that goes into growing food. And
Yeah.
it's frustrating because it's all just red tape that makes it hard for people who are doing something very logical and basic.
And my main thing right now I'm really trying to do is actually get like a beehive because
Yes. Ugh, I want to have bees.
my dear friend of the podcast, Cindy Moore, was on here. She's a bee farmer. She's got like thousands of beehives, so she's like gnarly. She like takes semi trucks. She's the reason we have avocados and almonds and shit.
Oh, that's so cool. I need to connect with her because I definitely need to learn more
Oh,
about
you totally
beekeeping.
can. Cindy was episode, I'm 45.
Okay,
But
I'll
yeah, if you
find
want
it.
to talk to her, just let me know. Like she's amazing. So like, dude, that's her whole thing. She's just like knowledgeable about like
Yeah.
bees in general, and like we need people like that keeping like, because wild bees are dying off, so
Mhm.
beekeepers are becoming suddenly becoming like a part of the like keeping the
Yeah.
environment together. I'm sorry, the lightning round always goes off the rails.
No, I mean, it's
Okay.
okay.
Oh, here's the one that I thought was going to be the hard question, but apparently I just went ahead and shot you like two hard ones before the one that I thought would be hard. But this actually is a very difficult question. But I want to know if you have any ideas for this. That's do you have any tips for how people can try to purchase food ethically if they don't have access to things like farmers markets or small businesses? So like, so your situation is maybe like, a major corporate grocery store that might be like the.
Yeah. So you said farmers markets and small businesses. I don't know if that would cut out like a cooperative. So some people aren't aware that there might be a cooperative in their town that they could contact. A lot of, smaller scale farms that might not do farmers markets will do something called a CSA, which is community supported agriculture. And you can contact that farm and you would pay an amount, generally like it's a lump sum at the beginning of the season, and then you would get like a weekly box of produce or however they decide to distribute it from that farm, that you would generally pick up. Sometimes they can deliver it, but it just depends on location. So those would probably be my two, co-op or CSA. Otherwise, I would look at the grocery store and see if they have any agreements, like any sections that are, local. Yeah, I know it's tough when a lot of people don't have options, and that's kind of where the food desert is like a big, huge problem.
Yeah.
But some people shop at a co-op, which is like a grocery store and it's a community thing. But then there might be like a smaller community co-op where those people produce that food and then they've got something worked out for the distribution and the pricing.
All right. So you heard it here first. Get those co-ops going.
Yeah.
All right. Now this is like, I made this a little wordy. I'm gonna make it less wordy, but I was just thinking about how corporations, they can like claim that they're individuals. That's why they're able to make donations to like campaigns and keep Monsanto basically in the government in a lot of ways. But because of that, like, logically, that would mean that they should be able to be tried in court as an individual
Mhm.
for like, let's say like felonious restraint or whatever, for like, for migrant workers. Like, if I was if I did that, if I was just one person and I had
Yeah.
a
Yeah.
thousand people that I was violating their rights, it would be very easy to take me to court and
Yeah.
lock away, throw me away, lock with the key and shit. So the real question is, do you like have any idea or maybe some people that you work with like have any idea like how in the future we might be able to do legal action with the system itself, or is that just
As it pertains
uh,
to food production
no, I mean
or
literally holding the people accountable that are committing the human rights abuses.
I have no idea. That is so far outside my wheelhouse. But I mean, I think that obviously the biggest thing is first going to be education. So, I mean, people just they have to understand what's going on before they can take a step to try to, change what's going on. I think that a lot of people get away with things because that knowledge is not there. And then even when that knowledge is there, we kind of normalize it and then we forget about it. Because I mean, there's so many dumpster fires just everywhere. So people can really only focus on like a few things at a time.
Yeah.
But I think really like making the effort to pay attention, continuing to be a part of those conversations, and then, you know, just trying to take the steps from there. But I mean, the legal stuff is definitely not my area of expertise.
It was just out of curiosity. It would, oh, okay. Here we go. I know you can do this one. What is the simplest and easiest action an individual can take toward creating agricultural freedom? So like, just like, let's say like I was going to do something today. Like, is there anything I could do like
Today.
this very moment? I could get up and I could go do something that would be worthwhile.
Well, when you say agricultural freedom, what exactly do you mean?
Well, ultimately, I mean,
Do
kind
you
of
mean
like,
like something good for the environment or like something kind of on like the logistical, like legal corporate end?
damn, you hit me back with more questions, and I don't know how to answer
So
questions.
I
I
just
only know how to ask them. Shit.
okay, if you're talking about
No,
like
okay.
just good for the
Well, here's what
environment,
I want. Uh, no, what I was hoping you would say is you would be like, well, you know, if you plant a sunflower, that right there, that's gonna be a million sequestered carbons. That's what I want. I want magic fixes.
all
So
right, my
my
thing
question
would
was
be
bullshit.
stop cutting grass and stop breaking leaves. And I
All right.
know that this is going to be right in the hearts of people who love their lawn maintenance. But I mean, the first stuff, like all of the grass in your yard is non native anyway. It's got a really shallow root base. It's not good for anything. It would be better if you just ripped it out and put in like some native prairie species or, well, depending on where you are. Um, but I mean, the most basic thing you can do is just stop cutting it and then let the leaves just be there. They retain the water, they fertilize the soil. I mean, they provide homes for all of the little animals and stuff that we love, but we're just kind of like not having here because we don't create a good environment for them. Like just leave the leaves alone.
Oh yeah, that
So
was also shout out back to like what I was talking about like with Cindy the beekeeper, because that was one of her main things is like plant flowers in the yard, fuck your grass, you know,
yes.
things that like keep the bees alive. So uh shout out to that, and also thank you for challenging me back. I fell apart because I wasn't expecting
No,
it.
I like to
I
make
just
sure I'm clear on what I'm about to say.
Oh no, I came to you for answers, and I didn't realize you might expect me to know anything. I'm like, oh shit, that's not what I do. I just ask.
Yeah, no, just stop cutting your grass, everyone, now.
Leah, this has been just absolutely fantastic. I know you're a very busy person. I know you're out here doing great work, educating people. So thank you so much for coming on my Views Around podcast and talking to me. And also, thanks for challenging me at the end. I deserve that. It was about damn time somebody showed that I don't know how to answer a question.
Well, thank you for having me again. I appreciate it. This was a good time. So.
Before you go, can you tell everyone like just like ways they might be able to like check out like just your organization, what you do, where you're at, like all that stuff?
Yeah, so my organization that I'm starting, I'm trying to get nonprofit status for that. I'm in the process of it. That's called Hakima for the Future. So I've got a website, hakimaforthefuture.com, also Facebook, Instagram. I'm sure when this is posted, we can put the links for it in there. But yeah, also Instagram is leah.wamboy _. So it's not like the most easily delivered handle ever, but yeah, definitely if there's questions or
WAMBUI.
yep. Yeah.
Have a good night, Leah.
Yeah, you too. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you for listening to My Views Are My Own. If you would like to contact me, you can hit me up at myviewsaremyown.com. I think there's a button on there. You just click it, send me any kind of message you want. Or you could go to Instagram at myviewsaremyown_podcast. Or if you're really feeling crazy, you could go to Twitter at myviewsaremyown. Wait, nope, that's not it. myviews_podcast. Or, blow me away by finding another way to do it, and I will be impressed. Thank you.